skill-based versus character level-based progression.
Yeah. Skill-based character progression.
To start off, at least.
Versus like class/level-based. Hey everyone, we're live. We're kind of carrying a conversation from backstage to the beginning of the live show. If you are here, thank you so much. We'd be very interested to read your questions from chat, because this is just really going to be a kind of I at least I expect it will be a stream of consciousness type conversation, because I'm going to call you. What do you want me to call you? Like I'm used to calling you Sable Phoenix, but there's also now the new channel, which I will put a link to in the description. It's not there yet.
Cool.
So
there's nothing in it.
The VOD goes. Yeah, once the VOD goes live, I'll put it in there.
Okay.
But what do you want me to call you? Like Rancher or Sable, or what do you like? What do you want?
However is most comfortable for you. It doesn't.
All right.
Doesn't
I'm probably just. For this time, at least, I'll stick to Sable, only because that's how I know you, and I will absent-mindedly call you that.
Sure.
But I will do my best. I will endeavor to change my vernacular to the Rancher or the Titterpig Rancher, or TPR.
Yeah, TPR would be great.
Yeah, maybe I'll just call you TPR.
Okay.
Sable's going to slip, but I will make the effort to call you TPR from now on. So we were watching some YouTube videos. I don't want to call anyone out or anything like that.
It's been a whole list of them. Including
It's been a whole list. So, but it seems like there is, and look, this is something that people talk about all the time, right? This isn't new. This isn't something that is going to be groundbreaking or anything.
Mm-hmm.
But there were some ideas that you had brought up while we were in the middle of this discussion, that kind of, it struck me, and I wanted to dive a little bit deeper into it.
Okay.
So I personally prefer skill-based system. Now, one of the things that you said, and this is the only time I'm going to put the words in your mouth or take the words from your mouth, I'd rather you go ahead and make the statements, but in order to explain, I'm just going to start off this way. So I prefer a skill-based system. Your take was, and I don't know if it's changed in the week, but your take was that a skill-based system is essentially a class-based system. It's just more granular, right? So if I want to build,
I think that's basically what I said.
Right. So I mean, I'm definitely paraphrasing. I'm definitely, but which
is definitely going to need a little bit more of unpacking, because I've definitely been thinking about it.
Yeah, for sure, and I we can get into that, but that take kind of struck me. I initially disagreed with you. I gave my reasons for my disagreement. I think I still do disagree with you, but I think that your take is very interesting. So my take is that.
Thank you. So do I.
My take is that I prefer a skill-based system because it's more true to life. Like, I am a IT professional. I can also learn how to knit chainmail. I can also learn how. I think the example that we discussed last week was a benediction. I can learn how to give a benediction, and there are, as you brought up, and as I'm sure we'll get into, it's not just you can give a benediction. There are contributing skills. There's group speaking. There's language involved. Depending on, like, if I'm going to give a benediction in Latin, I need to know Latin, or at least the Latin of the particular prayer I'm going to say. This whole stream isn't going to be religious. This is just the one thing. I don't know, because priest is a class or cleric is a class in a role-playing game. It made sense for me to just pick one, and that's the one that I defaulted to. And that's why I like skill-based systems, because it gives me an opportunity to really craft my character in a way that is tailored to me. Also, the experience that I'm maybe currently having in a game, or the experience I would like to have in a game. And so that's why I like skill-based systems. Now, stochastic agency. Hello.
Yeah, hi there.
Generally, most skill-based systems are lumped into category, archetype, troop for ease of use.
I just told him I'd like to hear that expanded on. Actually,
Yeah, I agree.
What
I
exactly?
agree.
What's the thrust of that?
But that's why I prefer a skill-based system. You said that. Well, I'll let you talk for a little bit. I just wanted to kind of start there and say, here's this is my preference. This is why.
Sure. Yeah. I think this is really interesting because we tend to agree on a lot.
Yes.
And we tend to get really kind of down into a lot of fiddly details, I guess you could call them. This one,
for sure.
This one addresses a core design concept, and it's one of the first ones where we've kind of, I don't want to say butted heads because we don't really tend to do that, but we do. We do aggressively investigate our ideas.
Yeah. There was definitely a perspective departure for sure.
Sure. Which when I said that, because I remember I was just doing a mental vomit, just a stream of consciousness kind of diarrhea in our Discord, and I was like, let me see if I can even go back and okay, they all say they hate leveling based systems but love D100 style skill based leveling, and then I was like, I'm sorry, that's the same thing. It's just increased granularity. Okay. So functionally speaking, of course, I recognize they are not the same game design. What I meant when I said that was that your in the way that you're playing, you're not really doing anything different when you level up a skill compared to when you level up a character, if that makes any sense.
Yes.
You as and I did mention this the last time we were kind of really talking about this, is that you as a player are still taking a certain amount of points or whatever means that you're using to mark progress and investing those in some way into your character in order to improve your ability to do a certain thing in the game world.
Right, like 10,000 foot view, it looks very similar.
Yeah, exactly. The only difference is you're either doing that for your character and kind of taking this bucket that gives you all this stuff all at once on a level up, quote unquote, or you're doing it in a piecemeal fashion, picking and choosing smaller aspects of the character that you want to focus on, probably sooner. Like, for example, Savage Worlds, Suede, Savage Worlds Adventure Edition. You get something, you get enough to level up at least a couple skills, or probably get a +1 in one attribute, an increased die size in one attribute every time you level up. That's just, and there's no real experience points in the system. It's just like, okay, you've played two sessions rather. It's about time for you to level up. There you go. And then you have a set number of points that you can invest into your character, and that one is skill based. You do not have character classes unless you're playing a conversion of, like, say, Pathfinder into Suede or what have you. And even then, it's fundamentally designed differently, so they kind of kludge it together. So, I mean, Suede is a really good example because you can use a non-class-based, skill-focused system to play a class-based, level-based system.
You absolutely can do that. And just to interject quickly, the reason that I prefer skill-based systems, now I can play in a class-based system, that's fine, but it is in a class-based system, in a traditional level-up system, it is very much, you are locked in to a very limited skill set within the scope of the character. Obviously, you can have, like, you can choose from hundreds of skills if they want to give you hundreds of skills to choose from, but they're all going to be for the warrior, and you cannot deviate from this particular group of skills. Like, There are some abilities that everyone gets to pick from, which is great, but mostly you're locked in to the abilities that you can acquire.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no crossover whatsoever. Like regardless of, hey, good evening, PH. There's no crossover, right? Like, again, the example is, as a warrior, I can't learn a benediction, like regardless of how devout I am to a particular faith or oath or personal conviction, I can't, in a class-based system, learn to do that stuff. Look, obviously there's going to be fringe cases, not talking about the fringe cases. I'm sure there's a class-based system out there that allows you to do this sort of stuff. Just, it's a general sort of idea. And that I find, like, if I want to be a paladin, class-based systems are great for that because I'm going to be a paladin. And there's definitely something to be said for the true-to-lifeness of a paladin, the spells that they would acquire, the abilities that they would acquire, because it will help them do their job better. And so why would you ever want to deviate from the things that are going to help you do your job better? So, like, I get the concept. I get the idea. And when I want to play a paladin or whatever, then it's great. Class-based systems are great. But I tend to prefer skill-based systems because there's a lot more flexibility with what I can do. Now, I will also say that in my limited experience, skill-based systems, they tend to be less like mythical or heroic, right? Like,
Yes.
in a skill-based system, you're not going to build a WoW character. You're not going to build some dude who can, like, chuck a building somewhere, right? Most skill-based systems just don't account for that sort of high power play, because I don't know why. That's worth exploring, I think. And again, this is in my experience. I'm sure there are cases where this is possible.
Well, I've been thinking about that too, and I would kind of actually, and we haven't really talked about this aspect of it yet in what we've talked about so far, but I think that that actually Powered by the Apocalypse style games are kind of like the perfect example of a fusion of the two approaches. In which is also flexible enough to kind of I don't want to say promote, but at least support either of those styles of play, or anywhere in between, really. Because you have, say, you have Monster of the Week, for example, where you're playing investigators into the paranormal, and you're like, you could be like Buffy, or you could be like Supernatural, or one of those television shows, right? That's kind of what it's based on. Who those guys actually tend to end up being superheroes kind of in their own right in some ways, but a lot of that has to do with plot armor as well. But or you can do something like Masks, which is a superhero based, like if you want to do Teen Titans or the League of Superheroes or something like that, then that's what that game is designed for. They're both based on PBTA systems, and you have a sort of amalgam of class-based, quote unquote, because you choose from playbooks that represent a certain approach that your character uses. Mm-hmm. But you also have, and your playbook gives you access to a certain set of skills. There's quite a bit of flexibility, it tends to be, in choosing which skills your particular character actually has within its playbook. And you can also, a lot of them will allow you, I know Monster of the Week does this, will allow you to, at certain times, invest in skills from other playbooks to start, multi-classing, I guess, if you want to call it that. They're called moves in a PBTA game. You can buy a move from a different playbook. So that's also something that might be worth thinking about and investigating more, and figuring out whether or not this kind of distinction even matters when you're going towards a more narrative or quote unquote story based game or what have you. And it seems that that is the main distinction as I've thought about this before we hopped onto the stream this evening. Is the class and level based systems tend to be crunchier, and they tend to be more focused on the combat aspect, at least, if not trying to simulate everything. Like, for example, there's a huge gap between the hero system and champions, or there's also a highly simulationist superhero game by the same guy who did Axe, Avenger Conquer King system.
Alexander.
Yeah, and I can't remember what the superhero one is called right now.
Oh, it's called. Is it Ascended?
No, that's different. Is it Ascended? Might be Ascended.
Let me look it up.
Anyway, apparently that one is. I haven't played it. I haven't looked at it. Apparently, though, that one is super simulationist, like down to like calculating the volume of gas you can produce if you have the power that lets you do that, or what have you, or for smoke grenade or something like that. Compared with something like With Great Power or Masks, a new generation, very much leaning more towards, or
it's called Ascendant.
Ascendant. Yeah, that's it. Yeah. Okay. Yes, Ascendant. And high crunch seems to be. I think the distinction is more that the more detailed and simulationist you get, the more crunchy it's going to get, and the more you're going to end up tending towards a class-based system. It seems to be.
Well, here an interesting point made is.
Although the Broken Empires game that's coming out here soon is apparently a class-based system that's kind of medium crunch, I guess. Like there's
that's how I've been calling it. I haven't bought into the sim-like moniker, but before we get there, Stochastic Agency says that Mithras and RuneQuest is skill-based and the combat is high crunch, and he's absolutely correct about this. So it's and then are there class-based systems where the combat is low crunch? I think so. I mean, look, I haven't played Spire, The City Must Fall yet, but I would believe that that's probably a very low crunch sort of a system. It's more dependent on declarative statements.
It's a lot more like
building and doing math, right?
Yeah, it is. For sure. It's a lot more like Blades in the Dark than it is.
Yeah.
I don't know. Than it is Harnmaster. Let's say.
Right.
Iron Crown Enterprises MERP. What we got here?
Yeah, Iron Crown Enterprise. I am entirely unfamiliar with that.
Iron Crown Enterprise MERP is I'm not modern something role play. Is that it? I don't know what the acronym means there.
I'm gonna look that one up too.
BRP is basic role play. I know that. Oh, Middle Earth RPG. Oh yeah, of course. Okay.
Okay.
Skill based and high crunch. Okay. Fair. I never played that one. That's the thing. There's so many games out there, so many different approaches.
Yeah.
So I almost feel like that my point has become less well defined the more I've thought about it. Just because there's a dozen exceptions to everything, right? Mm-hmm. You can talk about.
Well, see, that's kind of a lead into where we were headed with the conversation when you brought up, story gaming and
yeah.
Because I have also been sort of turning this around in my head, and it's like, at first I want to start off and say, well, story gaming is definitely different. Why is it different? And then the more you think about it, it's like, and this is something that you put me onto, like, I can use a set of rules and I can engage in role play and I can produce a story. The story is resultant from the play, right?
Right.
Whether or not I'm focusing on the production of that story, or whether or not I'm focused on the other aspects of the game, be it the combat, be it the role play itself, which is where I fall. I tend to just focus on the role play. The result is the same. Now, there are going to be systems that make certain aspects easier, right? So there are going to be games that make combat, like engaging with the combat, easier and more satisfying. There are going to be games that provide systems that make engaging with the role play more paramount, right? But generally speaking, you can use any rule set to do any activity that you like. And that being the case, it really ends up being just a matter of perspective and focus, right? So if I can focus on, if I'm a story gamer and I want to focus on crafting a story, then I can do that with the same rules that the role player is using to role play. And they can role play using the same rules that the combat strategist is using to engage in combat. And so, is there really a difference between story games, not story gaming, but story games, and role-playing games, right?
Right.
As a category. I'm now in my thought process leaning toward no, which I'm sure is going to get a whole bunch of people pissed off, but here I am.
Yeah, I'll back you up.
Look, it's the nature of critical thought. I'm just kicking this around, and it could be that at some point I decide, you know what? No, there is actually a very specific, very discrete reason why they're different categorically. Here's why. I haven't been able to name that yet, and because I haven't named it yet, your mind strays into these other areas of thought. Like, well, what if I'm wrong, right? What if I start off with an idea, I start with a hypothesis, they're different, I want them to be different. So I'm going to look for reasons why they're different. And then in the looking, you discover, well, are they really different? So if the only criteria is going to be perspective, how a player engages with the game, the answer is no, right? Because it's not because that will change depending on the players. I'm not looking to, and I know that this is sort of, it's been difficult to sort of abstain from. This makes Brian happier, makes Stochastic Agency happy, but it's. I have up to this point intentionally avoided getting involved with critical thought regarding play and engagement with rules because I wanted that to come later. Because I wanted to identify the category first, right? I'm still not really interested in getting involved with play necessarily. Like, I know that there are schools of thought out there. I know some people think I'm putting the cart before the horse in the order that I'm going in. That's okay. They can think that. I'm happy to sit and have conversations, which again reminds me I need to email Anthony. Anthony, if you're watching this, I will email you shortly. My apologies. It's taken so long. I have a whole, backlog of excuses to give you, but ultimately it's just an email. I should have been able to get back to you sooner. Apologies for that. But it's just, there are some times when I'm thinking about this stuff and it kind of just, it edges in, right? Like I kind of have to consider why people are engaging with it, how they're engaging with it. Is that significant? Is it important to the critical breakdown of what I'm trying to get at? Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. At the moment, it's kind of like a little mid, right? Like it has to be addressed, but it doesn't really have to be addressed in depth.
The two things, as you're talking and I'm sitting here thinking about it, the two things may be more closely tied, though, than it would seem on the surface. Because, and this is me putting words into other people's mouths, perhaps. I don't know. Maybe I'm going to nail it right on the head. But it seems to me that even though few people have really seemed to have spent the time to come up with this level of a definition, it seems to me that story games are called story games because the advancement to your character primarily happens through narration, through the narrative. Whereas what people would tend to call an RPG or try to differentiate from a so-called story game is where advancement tends to happen mechanically. So in both game types of game, you can have character advancement, but the RPG tends to base that advancement on discrete, measurable criteria. And story games, if you will, are less well defined. I want to say I won't say that they are undefined, because most of them have some way of tracking your character's advancement. Like, say, let's go back to PBTA games, where the one I know the best is Monster of the Week, so I'll just keep using that one.
Yeah, sure.
You have a certain number of bubbles you can fill in for each skill, and that represents your competence in it. And in order to advance a skill, it's not by accomplishing tasks and gaining XP. You can focus only on the things you're good at, and you can continually roll successes all night. You'll never advance your character that way. In order to get better at something, you have to roll a check on it and fail, and then you get to fill in a failure, a mark of, oh, I did something with this and it didn't work. Kind of like Thomas Alva Edison, right? I didn't fail. I just found 1,000 ways it wouldn't work. which is an interesting idea and more true to life, actually, in some ways, I would say, because you compare this to something like Dungeons and Dragons, especially 5e, where supposedly a roll of 30 is like nearly impossible, right? Except that with all the bonuses and the in your proficiency bonus and whatever else, other class-based tools, plus your equipment that usually gets bonuses, and all sorts of stuff like that it all piles on. And if you got maybe guidance in there and bardic inspiration and yada, 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 it's not uncommon for characters by level 5 or so to start breaking that 30 barrier on a consistent basis. Which then means that it kind of guides you and forces, it doesn't force you, but it heavily incentivizes you to only do the things you're good at and continue to front load, I guess you could say, your abilities. So it's not uncommon. Let's say you're level 12, say, like maybe you're a druid, and you've got a plus 12 or plus 14 to your wisdom save, and you're just pretty much never going to fail. Mm-hmm. Whereas, like, if you try and roll a performance check, it may still be very difficult for you to even hit an 18, say. And you become, despite having more and more options as you level up, you become more and more hyper specialized in what you actually do with all of them. Whereas in a PBTA game, let's say Monster of the Week again, like, you could theoretically, if you wanted to quote unquote power game, you'd go diving headfirst into situations where you knew you had a very low chance of success all night, and just fail checks left and right. And you could quote unquote power game your way into a stronger character that way, but your rest of your table probably wouldn't be happy with you.
It's the equivalent of smashing your face on the keyboard. Right? You get it done eventually.
Right. Yeah. So I am the 101st monkey. So the I going back to what kind of started this whole rabbit trail, I don't think that the distinction between quote unquote story games and quote unquote RPGs, if it exists, is so divorced from mechanics at all.
Yeah, like the more I think about it, because you will encounter a lot of answers to, like, you can criticize a system. I do this all the time. I'm sure you do this all the time. You can criticize a system for, like, Dungeons and Dragons. Let's just take that, right?
Yeah.
I regularly would criticize Dungeons and Dragons because it's a board game. It's a combat simulator. It's a combat board game. It's it's the game where everyone sits around and waits for something to happen. When the something happens, it's always combat, and then they have to wait. But as you would say, you pack 30 minutes of fun into 4 hours.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. So I would constantly, but you can role play in Dungeons and Dragons.
Oh, sure.
Your game does not have to be a combat board game, right? So you, as easily as you can adapt a system for role play, whether or not it's going to take a lot of elbow grease and figuring out the different crunchy bits and the mechanics, what's getting in the way and obstructing you from role playing, what's making it easier. Like, obviously there's going to have to be at least some measure of customization. Why can't I do that? Why can't I issue that same answer for a story game, or what we have been referring to as story game? Because it's a very kind of nebulous idea, right? Like, what I say is very much like a role-playing game. What I say is a role-playing game might be a little bit different, which is why I've sort of taken to asking guests if they'll indulge me. What is a role-playing game? What is
here it comes.
So would you be interested in answering those questions? I'm actually going to give you a reprieve because I want to get to PH's comments. I was no direction. They're probably in this direction, but so he says, skill-based systems sound great in theory, especially for video games, and I love systems like GURPS and Rollmaster, but they come with the challenge of micromanaging abilities, and building your ideal character can get expensive, I imagine, with point buys, or complicated.
Mm-hmm.
You're often limited by balancing issues, and essential fantasy-related skills may clash with others that would make a character overpowered. GURPS tries to solve this with varying skill costs, but it's still tricky. Classes, on the other hand, offer a predefined kit fitting the fantasy better. Ideally, a hybrid system with role kits and customizable skills might work best.
It makes me curious if he's ever played 13th Age.
Well, PH, have you ever played 13th Age? Yeah, I'm unfamiliar with 13th Age. My intention was to get the PDF and give it at least a cursory look through before we started the stream. I was not able to do that because I just, busy, and I just didn't properly make time for it, which is on me, and I own that. But PH, if you have played 13th Age, that's the question on the table currently. But there's going to be, there are pluses and minuses to both. I think that in some regards, okay, so here we go. He has not, but he knows the system and has some pieces. So
that's kind of a hybrid based system, I would say.
Yes. And earlier
it's D20 based. It comes off of it's a fork, I guess you could say, of 3rd edition.
Hey, take care, Brian. Let Anthony know I said hello and that I apologize for being a total cad with regard to responding to his emails. Sorry about that. Go ahead.
No worries. It's like a fork off of 3rd edition merged with 4th in some ways. In a lot of ways, actually, went in a very different direction than Pathfinder did, and has and we've already talked about this a little bit. It has obviously it's a D20 based system, has classes, has levels. It's only got, I want to say it's only got 10 levels. I'd have to go and reread it. I'm pretty sure it only has 10 levels because you're already a superhero when you start, essentially. To me, 13th Age does 5e better than 5e. for numerous reasons. I feel like Pathfinder Second Edition does Third Edition better than Third Edition does. 13th Age does Fifth Edition better than Fifth Edition does.
Okay, that's a very interesting statement.
I've mentioned it before, and have I mentioned it before in Heath's chat? Maybe not. I've said
I mean, possibly, but I
anyway, yes, I've
impressed.
mentioned that statement to other people. I know that before as well, and I would stand by it, and I could cite. If we wanted to get to a real kind of mechanical breakdown, I could back that up, but that's not our focus today. I'd have to go back and do some more research anyway. But 13th Age is really interesting because of all the stuff that it does to really lean into a lot of story game practices. Here's the other. Let me backtrack slightly. Here's the other kind of difference or distinction between RPGs and story games that I think most people are thinking of when they use those terms. It's that RPGs, the GM's word is law. The GM is the world. The GM is God, essentially, at the table. What he says goes, and the players are, in some ways, just restricted to the mechanics and what it allows them to do and the ways it allows them to break the rules. Whereas story games are a lot more focused on passing around narrative agency, if you want to call that, or narrative authority, out amongst the entirety of the table, to the point where something like Ironsworn you can run without even having a GM, and that's what Terran's doing with Vagabond as well. You can run it GM-less or even solo. But Indestructible Boy here on YouTube is who I'm talking about. If anybody doesn't know. 13th Age has actually quite a few concessions in that direction. Skills are one of them. You have, in fact, I shouldn't have put the book away, but you have. I know this is not the right word, but in that game you have professions, and that can be things like acrobat, thief, sailor, wrangler. Like an animal handler. Blacksmith, what have you. And if you get into a situation where you can, those professions represent you can, at character creation, assign 1 to 3 points in any one of those professions. And that represents your level of proficiency, competency and proficiency and mastery of those. Any situation you get in that you could reasonably narrate and explain why you would theoretically be able to apply that profession to a skill that you'd be using in that situation, you can use that bonus for that profession, for that check. The example given in the book is that this one character has a 2 in acrobat and a 4 in thief or something like that, and she's up on the roof trying to break into the window. That's the thief, obviously. It's like lockpicking, what have you. But then if she's jumping off the roof or falling off the roof or something, gets knocked off the roof, then she would use acrobat for tumbling. And obviously the GM could have some veto power there. It's like, I really don't see how your sailing is going to help you with this riding check. I'm sorry, or whatever. But or to convince the king that you're not a spy or whatever. But it's something that if the player is inventive enough and flexible enough with their professions that they've chosen, and they can narrate it, in a reasonable way, in a convincing way, then they can use that. And it's same with their one unique thing, which is very much I don't think I've ever seen any other game except maybe Exalted, you could say, does kind of this. In 13th Age, you have this special property for your character called one unique thing. It's completely divorced from any class or professions or anything else. It's a sentence you write down on your character sheet that dictates that you are the only person in the world who has this thing, or does this thing. Like if you write down, and it's a fantastic amount of character, of narrative agency, of narrative authority. Like if you write down, I am the only half-elven knight of the Dragon King. Well, that just doesn't affect you. That implies all sorts of other stuff about the larger world, right?
Yeah.
And
so it's definitely co-creation.
Yeah, exactly. So
it's a co-creative element for sure. Maybe not, in the moment of a scene, but definitely overall. And as you're sitting here talking about that, I should have renamed the stream to Story Games versus RPGs.
Kind of, yeah.
That's where we're landing. But so with a story that before you began speaking about this, you mentioned the practices of story games.
Mm-hmm.
I'd be interested in hearing more about that, like what you consider to be practices of story games. But I will say that while you've been explaining this, it really does strike me as the mechanics are story focused, right? Because inherent to this type of play is this conversation that you're having out of character with the GM above what's going on the tabletop. This is the GM, this is the player. I don't know why I did that. That you're going to have to sort of justify your actions in a scene with regard to what your character's capabilities are. Now, I do rather like calling your character an acrobat and having all of the creativity to sort of in the moment figure out why that would benefit you, because everything is, like giving a benediction. You have to know the words of the benediction. You have to know how to speak Latin. You have to know how to properly address whatever, deific authority you're appealing to. Public speaking is a part of that. Some sort of knowledge regarding holy texts or scriptures. So there's a lot of contributors. Like you can say that you can give a benediction, but there's it's not just giving a benediction. It's not just an action that you undertake, right? So there's a whole bunch of contributors to that. Now, to go back to my initial point,
if you don't know any of that, then you better have a good charlatan skill.
Right. But baked into this type of play is this idea that, oh, hey, Jordan Fuzz is here.
Hey,
I'm sorry that you can't sleep. I do hope that we don't put you to sleep, but I also hope that you get decent rest.
Should we do the whole screen in ASMR?
Jordan Fuzz, you actually missed me saying something about story games that you might enjoy. So at some point, if you have time, if you want to go back and see, or maybe it'll come up again, and I'll restate my opinions, but my ever shifting opinions. But because there's this element of taking you out of the role play inherent to the style of play, right? So it's not just, look, if you're in a role-playing game, it's going to happen. There are moments that take you out of character. Yeah. It is just, it's the nature of the beast. That is what's going, whether it's rolling dice, whether it's co-creating in a scene, whatever it has to be, you're going to be taken out of character for some reason or another. When I take a look at this particular style of play, and it's more than just incidental being brought out of character. It's actually a situation where inherent to this character creation, or this method of character creation, is this idea that at some point, for a large amount of time of play, you're going to have to engage in discourse with the GM, specifically with regard to working out how your character skills work. I know it's kind of a back and forth, and I know, how is it really any different
I would say
than a role-playing focused game? I don't know, right? I don't know the system. I've not ever played it, so I can't really sit here and speak with it on any kind of authority whatsoever. But it sounds to me like it's definitely, this particular system is definitely more quote unquote story game. However, you can absolutely use this for role play, right?
Right.
It's
and,
just
and PH says that 13th Age, he's read it, but he didn't play it because it's too close to D&D for him. So there you go.
oh, where do you say? Oh, okay, here we go. I really enjoyed reading 13th Age. I didn't play
It's
it
a
because it was
fantastic
too
read.
close to D&D. Okay, I just can't stand using the same 6 attributes and rolling a d20 with them. Okay. And then he says Warhammer Fantasy our roleplay has a fun career system. It does. While it's not necessarily a solution to balance or skill management, it isn't. I just thought it was worth mentioning. It absolutely is worth mentioning. I actually quite like Warhammer Fantasy roleplay. I'm sure you've heard me say this in
Yes,
probably
and
in
this is where
Discord
you'll
and
have a
in
lot
chat.
more actual experience than I will. Actually,
Well,
because
one
I've never
day I
played it.
think maybe I'm actually going to just start covering it. It is a system that I do rather enjoy. I love the setting. I love the lore. So maybe I'll just start covering it one day. But
to your point,
yeah, I was kind of rambling.
no, I don't think you were actually. It's just that there's a lot involved with the point. I think what you're describing with that stepping back out of character, out of quote unquote immersion, if you want to call it that,
Mm-hmm.
and kind of having the back and forth above the table, so to speak, between the players themselves and the GM. That I believe is more of a weakness of the system or the rule set than it is about the play style. In other words, we keep returning to this because I think it is the purest example and one of the best ones that everybody could agree is a story game, 10 Candles. Right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
That one is extremely explicit and well defined about who has narrative authority.
Yes. It's hyper unique.
When the player has narrative authority, the story they are telling happens. It is true.
Yes.
Whoever it is that wins narrative authority, whether it's the GM or one of the players, at that point, nobody can gainsay them, right?
Yes.
This is all in the service of a very specific goal that's already delineated by the time that you're even starting the game. We all know this is a one-shot. We all know every player character is going to die at the end. John dies at the end. Okay, we gave it away. Spoilers. Mm-hmm. So with that in mind, you cannot power game. You are on a railroad, so to speak, but you by yourself can't railroad the group. The 10 Candles is actually fantastically mechanically tight. It's just there's almost no numbers involved.
Right. Almost.
I mean, there is a pool of 10 dice, and you have to pay attention to the 6s and the 1s. So there are some numbers there's no math. There's literally no math at all. There's no prep, right? You are explicitly instructed not to prep the session before you start. It flies in the face of all of these conventions that we're told make up a role-playing game. But as you've said before, a rule set is not the game.
Correct.
What is in the book is not the role-playing game. That's just a set of rules. It's a set of tools in order to engage in the game.
Yes.
In a certain way, in a certain fashion.
Right. The role-playing game, I would say, is the rules, right? But the role play isn't in the book. It isn't in the rules.
Right.
It happens at the table.
The role play is something that occurs. It is not something that is inherent to the mechanics.
Yes.
So in my opinion, we're all just talking opinions here. I could definitely be wrong on this. It's not like I'm the authority, but in my opinion, if you're having a lot of back and forth, then that is because the game itself does not specify who has authority in that particular situation. And whether that's narrative or whether that's mechanical, because you can get into a lot of back and forth about mechanics, especially if you've got rules lawyers at the table.
True.
Which I admit I am one. And that's why it's so important in those kinds of RPGs or crunch-based systems to adhere to the GM's word is law rule. Because if they say something is done a certain way and you know that it's in the book different way, shut up. It's their table, you know?
Right.
Otherwise, you're going to derail the game. But like you were saying, like you've said a couple of times in different ways tonight already, is the manifestation of the activity may be different, but fundamentally it is the same activity. There's and that, to Druden Futz's point too, like some of my most transcendent, involving, inspiring role-playing has occurred in 10 Candles or in Ron Edwards' Slay With Me, for example. Like, those kinds of games are looking for a very specific type of catharsis. Almost a dreamlike, liminal type of catharsis. And when you're in that space and just, it's like watching the movie in your head and then you put it out there. I'll tell a story about the first time I ran 10 Candles. And there were actually like, how many players did they have? 5, I think. And 3 of them had actually, this was their first role-playing game experience. And so we go through, do all the setup and everything. We start playing. Early on in the game, it was either the first or the second candle. We still had 10 or at least 9 candles, I think. I think it was still 10. Anyway, at one point, one of the new players. Okay, so a little bit of a setup. One of the new players created this character who's like an Afghanistan vet, big guy, kind of haunted by the things he's seen and done, quiet, like the gentle giant type, right? Mm-hmm. Who can really who's you do not want to cross, you don't want to piss off, because he could break you in half, but he's carrying the baggage and the pain and whatever else that makes him very, very kind of protective, gentle, what have you, like big tank, the teddy bear, whatever, all those archetypes, right? It's a, in a one shot like this, you tend to play into archetypes, and that's not a bad thing. One of the other characters, also a new player, new to role-playing games, period, she created a child, 10-year-old girl. Mm-hmm. At one point, I don't remember what conflict I called for, but the veteran, he rolled the conflict, and he then proceeded to describe how, as he heard whatever noise it was or whatever caused the conflict roll, he swung his flashlight over and he saw one of them, the monsters, whatever they are. They're capitalized them. They're never named in the game. He saw one of them dragging the 10-year-old off into the darkness. And he leapt to her rescue and grabbed her and pulled her back to safety. And my jaw dropped at the table, because you get into these modes of thought, these habits. You get habituated by play, and there's kind of an unwritten rule at almost all tables, in almost all game systems, where you don't take over other players' characters, right? You don't describe what happens to them, what they do as another player. The GM can in certain situations, so depending, but as a player, that's generally taboo. And they just jumped into it, and then of course that little girl, that player's character, and I mean the player, like, they latched onto each other and they were inseparable for the rest of the session, right? It was like to the point where they ended up, a bunch of people were split off at the end in the final candle and the last stand and everything, and they were split up and they were still together. Everybody else was all dying on their own, and they went off and they had their last moments as a pair. And it was an amazing narration. It was an amazing game, amazing relationship, very memorable. It blew my mind because these were brand new players and they didn't have that unwritten rule in their heads.
Yeah,
it
wasn't, they didn't have an opportunity to learn that behavior yet.
Yes, so exactly. And so they just went for it. And in this game, in 10 Candles, it's designed not just permit but encourage that kind of thing.
Yeah, and that's another like idea, and that speaks towards something that I've been thinking about recently. It kind of came up when we started to just when I say we, I mean me, Jax, and Ben. The last time I had a role play live stream, we were talking about horror, and I started the stream off by supposing that character agency, their ability to act and affect the world, is, I didn't use the word sacrosanct, but it's often viewed as sacrosanct. However, because horror at its core is a loss of control,
Mm-hmm.
you have to limit that agency. Now, Ben had extremely interesting ideas
Mm-hmm.
how to effectively do that without telling a player what they're doing, what they're seeing, how they're reacting, where they're moving, which I found fascinating, because there is a way, there is a phraseology to GMing in such a way so as not to infringe on the character like that. But sometimes, even absent a horror experience, sometimes in life I am transgressing on someone's agency, right? Like I am doing something that's limiting their capability to react or to act, and not in any sort of like harmful way, but they're like I said, I'm an IT professional, right? So I'm a tester, and we testers have an adversarial relationship with developers, not an antagonistic relationship, but an adversarial relationship. They are developing to a specification, and I am testing that development against that specification to try and make it fail, so that we can shore up the development toward a specification. And when I do that, right, like I am definitely transgressing on this particular developer's agency by saying, no, this isn't meeting the specification. I need to send this back. You need to recode it, right?
Mm-hmm.
At least in a nominal sense. So I don't necessarily think that.
Because you're both working for a common goal, though.
Right. We are both working for a common goal. And it's sort of like kind of like what happened here with these two individuals. They were working toward a common goal, and one transgressed on the other, but in a very real kind of human way, right? That's believable. That's, look, you could have a kid that wants to run out the front door into the middle of the street with oncoming traffic. If you grab the wrist and yank them back inside, you are absolutely restricting their agency. And that's good parenting, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
That's a good way to do it. So I don't necessarily think that character agency is as sacrosanct. However, if
you can have plenty of agency and still be helpless.
Yes, that's true. That's true. And that's a point that Ben made. It's a difference between hopelessness and helplessness, right?
Let me interject briefly, real quick. The Forever Winter just released into early access yesterday. Holy crap! Talk about evocative.
Okay.
You're somebody who's walking around with two guns on your hips at all times, and you feel utterly helpless from the immediate inception of the game.
Mm-hmm.
You want the atmosphere, the design, everything about the environment, everything about the game immediately impresses upon you how small and weak and in danger you are at all times, despite the fact that you're carrying around automatic weapons. You actively do not want to fire those weapons. Like if you see enemies coming around the corner, maybe it's just 2 or 3, and yeah, you can take them. You fire your weapons to do so, and then all of a sudden you see the little circles of question marks pop up, and you've got 10 more coming at you, and you don't have the ammo for it, because you have limited carry capacity, and your weapons aren't all that great, really, at least when you start out. And so, despite the fact that you have plenty of agency,
Mm-hmm.
everything about the setup incentivizes you to avoid conflict, avoid being seen, be slow, be methodical, be patient. And even then, all it takes is one little slip up, like not noticing that there's a whole line of Eurasian cyborgs coming up behind you, and bam. And you have you have like 1,500 hit points, but that doesn't matter. You're still going to go down in a few hits.
Yeah, if there's if there's a
so
lot of you, sure.
Yeah, exactly. So,
and that this speaks to
the
what
idea,
he was
like,
driving
you can,
at with
yeah,
stress. Like you want
yes,
to put someone in a stressful situation or a chain of stressful situations that it's uncomfortable enough to sort of encourage them to decide to act to end the stress now.
yes,
The
yes,
reason you
yes.
do that is because when they act in such a manner under such duress, their decisions become hampered by that stress and by the desire to end the stress now. On top of that, there's that item or that issue with helplessness versus hopelessness, right? So hopelessness is an actual inability to be able to affect the world around you. Helplessness is just the seeming, and I hope I got that right. I hope I got those two right. But helplessness is just the seeming of an inability to effectively engage the world around you or change the world around you.
I think it would be opposite, but yeah, you know what you mean.
But yeah, it might be the opposite, but you know what I'm getting at. You know what I'm getting at. Yeah, like genuine helplessness is they can't do anything, but hopelessness means they can do something. They just don't really. I think you're right. I think I got it backwards.
They don't feel like they can. Yeah.
We need to have more conversations with Ben to really kind of nail that down. But absolutely fascinating conversation.
Hey, BGD.
This is not some. Oh, hey, BGD. Thank you for showing up. This isn't something I normally do. I don't normally stop in the middle of a discussion to say, "Hey, go watch one of my streams." But honest to goodness,
oh yeah, that was a great stream.
Ben is
absolutely
fantastic. I highly encourage you to go and watch. Oh, hey, Mike. Thanks for swinging by, guys. Thank you.
Not to worry, Dridenfoots. I'm going to swing it back into the title a little bit here now.
Yeah, it's funny. Because I may have to retitle this because we landed on story games versus RPGs or
well, we've dipped back into horror games and the whole idea of agency. But
yeah, let's
bring Mothership into the discussion, which is D100 roll under system, skill based, right?
Right.
And I know that I was telling you about a story that I read that was really great, a really great summation of Mothership about this guy who rolled up this character who was an utter tank. He rolled just about the best you could on all his stats. He rolled up some really good, he had real high resources, so he got some really good, a suit of powered armor and had a machine gun and the whole deal, right? And he's got theoretically he's loaded for bear and has got all of the stuff that he needs to handle any situation. And he's like, okay, I'm going to be up at the front. I'm going to keep the rest of the party safe. And he does, for the most part, for a while until the machine gun ammo starts running low. And then the story goes, but even then I was still beefy, like nothing could touch me until we got to the boss monster and he swallowed me whole. He said, I survived, but my armor was wrecked. My machine gun was dry, and then I biffed my stress rolls so I ended up with a pacifist affliction, whatever you want to call it, where you have to actually roll a check anytime you want to try and attack something. He says, this ended up with me laying on an air grate. You got out of the monster, like the monster vomited him up or whatever, but he's like, that ended up with me laying on an air grate in my ruined armor, covered in blood and bile, with a revolver pointed at the enemy, at the monster, fighting my friends across the landing bay, struggling to pull the trigger. And I'm like, that's like the perfect horror RPG story right there. And if you know the system of Mothership, it leans into that because you're generally kind of like Call of Cthulhu, right? You're generally pretty bad at most stuff when you start. Like 30% success rate's pretty high, honestly, for a new character. So yeah, you can have all the resources and all the agency and all the hope you want, and when you get right up against it, a good horror game just shows you how little that matters. Maybe Aliens is that same way. I've yet to play a game, but I love the book. I mean, it's Free League. Everything they make is top tier quality. So just by quality standpoint, it's an absolute pleasure to read. But their stress system and the way it mechanically works is extremely interesting too. And I really want to get some playtime in with that one.
Me too. I have yet to play, but I would love to play the game.
Yeah. So I think one of the reasons that you tend to see skill-based systems in like horror games, for example, is because of that granularity. It's like, yeah, you can be constantly advancing, but it's like you're doing it by your fingernails, and you're okay, I just made a little progress here, and it's like climbing up the side of a rock wall. Whereas I don't remember if it's Dave Thumavor or Ben Milton. I think it's Dave Thumavor. He says games like 5e, D&D or whatever is like driving a mech. It's like you have all these switches and buttons and dials and all these things you got to keep track of, and you're hitting this one and pressing that one on your turn and whatever else, and like you have this huge smorgasbord of options. Or rather, how was it that I put it the other day? You have a ton of choices but very few options, right?
Yeah, and PH, he just dropped this, and I was waiting for just a natural place in the conversation to interject it. He says it makes perfect sense to horror games, and it does. And I think that something that we've maybe not incorporated into the conversation up to this point is the experience that you want to have at the table. If your goal, right, is, let's say, and it works with Call of Cthulhu too, because if your goal is to survive or to survive as long as you can, then you're going to use those skills or tailor your character in such a way, at least to the concept. They're all not always going to be the same, but you're going to want to try to survive as long as possible. In that regard, right, skills make more sense because there's no real power dynamic there, right? So I'm going to die in an Alien game. It's going to happen. Maybe it'll happen in a half hour. Maybe it'll happen in an hour. Maybe it'll happen with our first encounter with the alien. I think a natural 6 just outright kills a guy.
Yes, if the alien rolls a natural 6.
Right, if an alien rolls a 6, it doesn't matter what else is going on.
Punches his pharyngeal jaws right through your skull and it's over.
So, like, that is going to happen. What I am trying to do as the player going into this type of game, this type of experience that I've agreed to have in a group setting, I'm trying to survive as long as I can as the character. And so it makes more sense to do skill-based systems. But in a game where you want to be heroic and you want to be, that mech pilot, impervious mech pilot, you don't care who's shooting at you. You're going to be able to take the bullet, down to the last hit point, because I have a whole video on how hit points aren't fit for purpose. It depends on the purpose. But generally speaking, I dislike them for a fantasy role-playing experience. However, if you want to feel like the biggest badass on the block, hit points might be the way to go, because you are still operating at peak proficiency even if you're on death's door.
Yeah.
And so it really just depends on the type of experience that you want to get at the table. And that's not necessarily something that we've connected through as a through line to skill-based versus class-based, right? And I think that probably
run that by me again.
It's a major role. Like, the type of experience you want at the table that's going to be it, or at least in my view, it probably should be the reason for system selection, character generation, all of these different things.
Sorry to interrupt. Run that by me again. Just run that by me again, because I think that was a really important point that you just made, and I don't think I quite caught it.
Okay, the type of experience, we haven't drawn a through line for the type of experience that you want to have at the table. In my view, the type of experience you want to have at the table is all the way at the top, right?
Right.
Everything else plugs in from there.
Whether or not you're searching for, yes.
Right. Whether or not you want to focus on role playing, whether or not you want to focus on narrative, whether or not you want to focus on combat, like the type of experience that you want to have is everything else is going to, be adjusted toward that experience. So everything else is on a sliding scale once you define the experience that you want to have.
Mm-hmm.
And for for skill-based systems, the type of experience you want to have as a through line to skills versus class-based isn't necessarily a connection that we have made yet up to this point.
Okay, right.
I think that it's worth making that point because now it's not just a matter of skill-based system versus class-based system, right?
Well,
I can have my preference. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Okay, I get it, and I think that why that's so important is because you're touching on where everybody seems to get hung up in all of these debates about story game versus RPG or skill versus class or level versus non-level or whatever else. Is like, it's not that one or the other is necessarily objectively better. It's about how well they facilitate whatever it is that you as a player and you as your table wants to get out of your play.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And
that is what is important.
So then looking at it from that example, what is the type of play that a class-based system, if I can expand on where I think you're taking this point, what is the type of play that a class-based system promotes over a skill-based system and vice versa? Yeah. And what type of play are they better at promoting and vice versa?
And so now, putting that out there, right? So Trudenfoot says, I prefer to go in horror with narrative systems as well. Sure, the Alien RPG is great, but if I look at a system with like Dread, then I think that's more interesting to create rising tensions. So now
I have Dread. I haven't played it yet, though.
As in her observation or preference, rather, statement of her preference. I also have a preference. It's a more broad preference, so I'm not going to say that I prefer Dread over Alien or Alien over, Call of Cthulhu. What I am going to say is that I definitely prefer a horror-style role-playing game, or at least a hopeless-style role-playing game. I like going into a role-playing game with a fatalist perspective. I like knowing that I'm going to die by the end. Because of that preference, I think that's probably fueling my preference for skill-based systems.
Okay. Oh, interesting.
Because it's the experience, right? So here's the experience that I prefer. What best achieves that experience? What best points upward to that experience? If my preferred type of experience is a fatalistic horror type setting, it makes sense that I want it to be a skill-based system, because if you can do class-based in this situation, but the skill-based system allows me the fluidity to adjust on the fly and sort of be in that moment and be that character and really try to stay alive, right? Well, what skill is going to help me the most? What have I just encountered that really taxed me or taxed the group that we weren't really prepared to handle? Let me go ahead and see if I can specialize in a skill that would help in this regard, right? Can't really do that in a class-based system because you're locked into a group, a suite of skills that you can choose from, but might not necessarily be tailored toward that specific situation you're coming out of.
Which is kind of where the idea of the Holy Trinity comes from.
Yeah, I think that's where my preference is coming from.
Fighter, wizard, healer.
So I'm going to go to the comments for a moment.
So then you have played PBTA system. You played Monster of the Week, right?
No, I actually haven't.
Oh, you haven't? Oh, really?
Nope, I haven't played.
Maybe I'll have to run a game, because that one's fairly easy to run remotely.
Yeah, I would love to. I want to play as many games as possible. I want to get as much experience as I can. Like, I'm familiar.
I'd be very interested with what you just said, what you feel about Monster of the Week then, because like I said, PBTA is kind of this weird hybrid between class-based systems and skill-based systems.
Okay.
And story game with a story game kind of narratively focused bent, right? So
yeah. So I'm going to go to the comments here.
Yeah,
BGD
yeah.
says
We've actually got quite a few
agency.
comments.
Yeah. I don't want to skip out on anyone. So agency, both perceived and actual, can play out very differently under different contexts of RPG scenarios and systems. Not all horror games created equal. Completely
sure.
agree. Completely agree.
In fact, I would
Says player
posit,
agency, huh?
I would posit that most horror games don't really get the vibe right, to be honest.
I think that it's hard to get the vibe right. For
I think the idea, whoever came up with the idea of a stress mechanic, was genius, or I don't know what the progenitor of that was. Maybe somebody in the chat does. That has done more for horror gaming, I think, than almost anything else. Blades in the Dark even uses it in a way.
Agrees. That's why I think in
yes,
Alien the stress meter is more
for
interesting
sure.
than the skills.
Oh,
for sure.
Also, Breathless system. I don't know if anyone's familiar with that. Games like Stoneburner, check that out. We're not talking about specific mechanics in specific games so much tonight, so I won't get into detail. But it's very interesting. It's also a stress-based kind of mechanic.
Yeah, you've referred me to Stoneburner before. I haven't yet read it, but yeah, you've referred that to me, and I haven't yet read it, but I'm very interested to read through.
Yeah, and I'll just promote it to the people who are in the chat too. It's like it has its own interesting take on that kind of mechanic.
And then BGD continues. Player agency and control in a survival horror game has a different expectation than it does in a horror investigation, a la Call of Cthulhu. Very, very true. Absolutely, completely agree. So I've already read that Drudenfoot's comment. Let's go to PH, who says, I never felt the need to have a lot of skills in Vampire from White Wolf as well. It is a more narrative game, and one could think you need a lot of skills, but that was not the case. I agree with you, but I view Vampire as it's a very social game.
Yes.
It's very, like, the entire system is constructed. You're in a clan, and then it breaks down into your different, what are they called? The groups, whatever. I don't remember what they're called. The different groups that you can be in, like the Lansane Sanctum or the Ordo Dracul. And then from there, you're in your own smaller group, like a little coterie of you and the other, there could be people from other clans. There could be people from other, what are they called? It doesn't matter. It's been removed from my brain at the moment, but like within your small group, you could have opposing views. Your clans could be at war. Your different organizations could be diametrically opposed as far as their beliefs are concerned. And so the entire game is really set up for that character interaction. It's very social, pointedly social. And that's really where the role-playing comes out of in those games, is that you are interacting with these other people around the table or in a
large... It's all about navigating the hierarchy, right?
Yeah, exactly. And PH says, I guess it may have something to do with rules light or not. I don't know if Vampire is necessarily rules light. I don't think it's as crunchy as other games.
But it's definitely not what I'd call rules light.
Right. No, and I think it's the way that the game is really constructed with regard to that social focus.
Boy, I could say something about that too. But if I do, we're going to get into how the actual governing meter of RPG activities is time, not anything else, whether a game can be called rules light or not, which is not our subject tonight. I have thoughts on that.
I actually prefer Requiem to Masquerade. I played, in fact, most of my play was in the Masquerade.
Heresy.
But I really, I prefer Requiem. I think Requiem 2nd Edition is the best version of Vampire. But those organizations are still, I think they're definitely more player created in Masquerade. But there's also the Sabbat and the Camarilla and Masquerade. Those also exist in Requiem, but it's a little bit more fuzzy. So it just made, I really like the breakdown in Requiem for those different organizations. So that's the one.
PH says something really interesting in the chat. You need to bring it up here shortly.
Now you made me think that this one here.
Yes, his
role play experience one prefers. Yeah, I think that's the direction that at least I'm headed in, and I think it's probably going to be, if it doesn't end up being, paramount to my opinion. It's definitely going to help shape it. That's for sure. I think this is a very important perspective
Yeah,
to
yeah,
sort of
yeah.
explore. Will we land there definitively on solid ground? Who knows? But I
Well,
love having the conversation.
bring up that entire thread of his stuff.
Okay, in highly specific settings, it can feel like you need granular details to make characters stand out, but in rules light systems, fewer, more thematic choices can have a bigger impact. Let me read that again. In highly specific settings, it can feel like you need granular details to make characters stand out. Yes, I agree. But in rules light systems, fewer, more thematic choices can have a bigger impact. I believe I also agree with that. I think that's a really. So, what did you want to say about this?
No, keep going. He's got a couple more. Bring
Okay.
up
My
his next
apologies.
ones.
The simplicity
No,
allows
yeah,
deeper immersion without micromanaging skills. The simplicity allows deeper immersion without micromanaging skills. Yes.
it's like the thematic.
It's like the thematic weight of each choice compensates for the lack of detail. Okay. That contrast can actually enhance the role playing by emphasizing the story over mechanics.
And they were getting into what is a story game again.
Yeah, well, we could also sub role play in here, right? Like that contrast can actually enhance the role playing by emphasizing the role playing over mechanics.
I think a lot of what he said there, you could swap out a bunch of different terms. And again, this is kind of where everybody I think is ending up pointing.
Yeah, I agree with that.
The overriding concern, or the governing concern, I guess you would say, would be the type of play experience you're looking for, and then how well do the individual moving parts, how well does your tool set that's inside that book facilitate that experience?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And then here's Druden Fuzz agreeing,
right?
I believe, about Requiem.
Yeah. That was really, really good stuff there, PH. I think that's incredibly
very insightful.
I'm gonna have to take that and mull that over some more as well and kind of integrate it.
Yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of like copy paste consideration going on here, just to sort of think about what you guys have been throwing at us, all of you, BGD, PH, Stochastic Agency from earlier, Druden Fuzz, everyone. So.
And with all of this, we still have yet to define what a role-playing game actually is.
Yeah, who knows? Yeah, that's so. It's one of those things, right? Like it's one of those things. Like I can tell you what a movie is. Like I definitely know what a movie is. I definitely know what a board game is. I definitely know what a video game is. Right?
I'll float my definition because we.
Oh yeah, I wanted to ask you. So, what's a role-playing game, and what is role-playing? Go for it.
So yeah, we came back. We ended up here again eventually, and it was like, oh wait a minute, we never did that. So, this is my working definition at this point. A role-playing game occurs. It is not a thing in and of itself. It is an event which occurs. So. A role-playing game occurs when a group of two or more people. Yeah, I may still have to work.
Yeah, do you have to change that?
Because this
solo gaming.
Yeah, exactly. Because that would eliminate solo games, and I don't necessarily want to do so. But for right now, a role-playing game occurs when a group of people, in search of a similar type of catharsis, use a tool or a set of tools to engage in a guided conversation that will result in a mutually imagined series of events that can be told later on as a story.
Okay. I'm hanging on the can be told later on as a story.
Well, that came from you, by the way, because I remember you bringing up in a couple of different streams, I think it was, where the role-playing game in and of itself is not the story. It's not there to tell a story. The story is what occurs
in a story.
It results in a story because if you go down to the store and you want to get bananas and they're out, so then you go to the next store or across town and your car ran out of gas and now you have a story, right? But the goal was not a story.
Everyone communicates in stories. Every human person communicates via story, right? Like and my very favorite example is how was your day? And then you construct a story about how your day went, and you are going to put emphasis on different things that different people have done. If you're proud of the work that you completed, you're going to help encourage the audience to, or, audience of one usually, right? Your spouse is going to ask you, your parents are going to ask you, we get home at the end of the day, hey, how was your day? You're going to encourage them through the telling to feel proud of your accomplishments or to feel angry at the way that you were treated. And so every question that you answer, unless it's a fact-based question or a yes or no question, is going to involve some sort of story. Like, that's how humans communicate, which is why I will consistently maintain that telling stories is the most important thing that human beings can do. That's how we impart experience. That's how we impart knowledge. It's the most important thing that a human being can do is tell a story. And so,
but in the moment,
look, not all stories are going to be great, but engaging in the activity is the most important activity humans can engage in, because it is the perpetuation of the species, right?
Right. Well, it's how all of knowledge is passed down.
Yeah. So the reason that I'm hanging on that in your definition is because, is it a necessary part of the definition? Like, because I'm sitting here and it's a situation where, like, it will naturally result in a story, but does it have to result in a story? But, well, it naturally will, because it just will as a matter of course.
Okay.
Like, does it have? So, like, I'm trying to think of a situation where, like, a role-playing game doesn't result in a story, and that's just,
when you put it like
that,
it's
impossible, right?
No, when you put it like that, then then that ending bit of the reason I put it there was because of what you said about story, but it's probably superfluous. It's like, okay, well, that's going to be the result no matter what, and therefore it doesn't need to be specified. And also, I'm not being critical. I'm not criticizing.
No. It's your definition, and I'm not trying to have you change anything in the definition. I am just trying to sort of come to grips with your vocabulary.
And that's why I said it's a working definition, right? It's not like this is not something that I'm saying is a hard and fast rule. I also think that maybe I need to revise that to include the fact that the role-playing game is a simulation of, I touched on it with a mutually imagined series of events, but the reason that you're using a role-playing game in the first place is because you're trying to simulate an in-the-moment experience that you can then respond to in a place or a situation where you are not actually, right? In an imaginary situation or series of events that you can respond to in real time, and then that will result in you responding in real time as results in the subsequent story. So, what did Drudenfoot say? Game is a noun.
Yeah. Okay. Game is a noun, but the definition there seems to be about a verb, meaning your definition. There's a reason why I also let the game part drop under the table and talk about experiences. She had mentioned earlier that she calls the system that she's developing, or the game she's developing, a role-playing experience, not a role-playing game. So there's agreement there. And then she says here, my stories are always great, and I really have to run a scenario with Bacon. The ideal ending is that his character gets eaten by the other character. Bacon for everyone.
Because everything's better with bacon, man.
And then PH says up here, I can see Dr. Lewis Pulsifer frowning, saying something like, it doesn't matter, just play the damn thing, with all respect.
Sure.
Lou, I'm actually in conversations with Lou to bring him back on. We don't yet know what the conversation or what the topic is going to be, but I hope to have him on again soon. Maybe we can arrange co-hosting in some way, shape, manner, or form. I don't know if Jax wants to be involved. Maybe you want to be involved. Everyone in chat. I think I really like engaging with chat. I really like the perspectives, the opinions, and so I think that during that particular interview, I was sort of, I can't quite remember how participatory chat was, but I do remember sort of not really engaging with chat. And that's on me. That was a decision that I made purposefully, because I wanted to give Lou, the guest, as much of my time as possible. But I don't know. I just really like chat's involvement. So I'll endeavor to make sure that I am more attentive to you guys. And again, I'm really thankful that you're all here. I think this has been one of the better streams on the channel. The conversation has been fantastic. Thank you. I almost called you Sable. Thank you, TPR, for being here. Thank you for having the conversations. We still need to get to what your definition of role play is.
Oh, sure.
Not a role-playing game, because I like to differentiate between those two, because I think that they're different, right? I think that a role-playing game is different from role-playing. You can role-play in a role-playing game, but just because an activity involves role-play doesn't mean it's a role-playing game.
Right.
Thank you for being here, BD. I do appreciate it.
Yeah, we didn't even get into how I kind of also connect leveling systems to computer games in a lot of ways. Part of the iniquities of this of them, I guess, kind of lays at the feet of how deeply influential D&D has been to computer game design, and how levels and hit points and all that kind of stuff are just de rigueur. Like people just default to that mode of thought.
Mm-hmm.
And how just because you make something take longer doesn't mean it's harder. It just means you're spending more time to do the same thing.
Mike, you don't have to apologize for being late. I'm really happy that you're here. So please don't apologize. I mean, you're forgiven if you need that, but it's really not necessary to apologize.
But it sounds like you're wrapping up. So
no, not quite yet.
Oh, okay.
I was kind of, I don't know. It was just a weird little aside. I don't know. Maybe getting a little mushy for no reason. Unless you have to go. If you have to go.
No, I don't. I do not. Okay. No, I'm good.
So PH says here, before we move on to what role-playing is, according to you, PH says here, the challenge with defining a role-playing game lies in its multifaceted nature, which has evolved significantly since the 70s. What we call RPGs then isn't necessarily, what we call RPGs then isn't necessarily what we do today. Trying to pin down a clear definition often results in circular logic, like using a religious book as proof of its own faith. The term ends up defining itself. As RPGs continue to change, it's hard to find a definition that isn't self-referential, and the evolution of the activity complicates that further. I agree with you, which is why I tend to split role-playing off of role-playing game and sort of ask for two definitions instead of just one. Mm-hmm. Because if you ask for just, well, what's a role-playing game, and then they involve role-playing in the definition of role-playing game, I think that's when it becomes circular. But if you define role-playing, and then you define a role-playing game, you can sort of stitch together how those two interact with one another at the table to provide the experience that you've all agreed upon, which is kind of the direction I'm going in. Also, I think that it is currently, not that it will ever change, it is currently the case that whatever the definitions given for a role-playing game are, they are individualized. So my definition could be, and is, different to your own, TPR, and probably PH and Mike and BGD and Druden Fuds and Stochastic Agency, and everything here. But that's okay. That's okay. I think that in asking people for their definitions, you will find that we're going to uncover some consistency and some commonality through most of those definitions, which is why I ask. I'm not asking to just kind of get a shotgun blast of info to see what I agree with or what I disagree with. I want to know what the common things are that everyone says or most people say is involved in role-playing in a role-playing game, because I think that's going to be the essential elements of a role-playing game. And then if everything else around that can spin or morph or be reinterpreted, that's okay, right? It's okay that it's a moving definition. It's okay that we're constantly adding things to the hobby that we didn't have 50 years ago that change perspective, right? That's fine. It happens in film. It happens in medicine. Like it happens in hard sciences. It happens in sauces. It happens all over the place. I don't think there's anything wrong with that sort of mutable movableness to opinions and definitions. But I think that there is always going to be some measure of commonality, like a thread that we can draw through, from 1970 all the way up through today, something that is consistent with role playing. Maybe there isn't, but I'm going to try.
Well, if that's the case, then we really do need to bring time considerations into this discussion.
Well, first, before we get there, give me your definition of role play.
Of role play,
we've done role playing game. Let's do role play
as an activity.
This one is not some role play,
right? And this is something that I haven't actually spent as much time thinking about or writing down a solid definition. But I think the idea of role play is. Role play occurs when someone engages in a hypothetical, or hypothetical is not right. When someone engages with an imagined environment and events to experience the in-the-moment responses to experience the in-the-moment. I don't want to say sensations. I guess sensations is just about the only way to do it, because emotions are sensation. You can have sensations that occur without actual physical interaction. So, to experience the sensations of being as if they were in that actual situation.
Okay.
And it doesn't have to be, and I do not specify that it has to be playing somebody other than yourself, because as you've mentioned before, you can role play yourself in that situation.
That wasn't me. That was Lou. I was
okay.
not. See, that's not even an idea that I held in my head until I read this article in Dragon Magazine. That was 100% Lou, and I want to give him all the credit for that, because he's the one that turned me on to that way of thinking.
Yes, that's true. That's 100% right. But I mean, it's at this point, it's permeated my thinking, and obviously yours to such a degree. Is like, oh yeah, of course. How else could you not take that into account? So yeah, it's role playing is engaging with an imaginary set of circumstances and environments that, in order to experience the sensations of being, of responding to those circumstances and environments.
Okay.
Again, it's a work in progress. So
obviously. This is in the moment. This is a snapshot. It may change in a day, a week, a year, but in the moment, that's what you've got. And I'm happy to hear the changes when they come. So PH says role playing can be a theatrical exercise in acting schools, or something you do with your partner in bed. Is there a way to define the role playing that matters to us without the game in mind? I think it is the game that makes it matter. So there is role playing, right? And that would encompass all of the above. So it would encompass role playing in a therapy situation, role playing with a partner in bed. It would encompass the role playing in acting schools, on a stage, on a screen. It would encompass all of those things. What makes it important to us is the application of the role playing game, right? So I think that defining role play.
I'm going to throw a slight wrench into this.
Why?
Okay. Just almost as a way to be a little contrarian, but
no, please do.
I role play all the time in a game that doesn't have any actual rules to promote the role play.
Right.
I still play City of Heroes.
Okay.
I role play my characters in that all the time.
Mm-hmm.
There are no mechanics designed in that video game designed to define, constrain, reward, incentivize, promote, or in any other way interact with role playing. In
Yeah,
that
it's
game,
personal
it's
experience.
literally just talking and emoting as your character would.
Yep.
Sometimes not even in the situation that's present on screen, because you can get into way more detail than the game
Yep.
even allows. So,
So I
so
think that what you're driving at currently is there is, I think, a sort of a fuzzy edged difference. There's a line. It's maybe not a line. It's definitely not a hard line. Maybe it's a permeable barrier of some sort. But I think that there is a
a
division.
semi-permeable membrane.
Right. It's the powerhouse of the cell. I think that there is a difference in the what I've called personal individual experience in a group setting, which is what you're doing in City of Heroes, versus emulating a character for the benefit of an audience. Both are role playing. I can role play in by my lonesome in a situation like I recently purchased Space Marine 2.
Yeah.
I can, while I'm playing that game, role play as that character completely silently. No one has any idea I'm doing it. I'm going through the exercises of putting myself in the mind of the character as I go through these different situations. How would I react? Did I react differently than the way the character did on the screen or was scripted to react? That is role playing, right?
Sure.
But it is an individual experience. Now it's removed from the group setting, but I think that the role playing that we are mostly concerned with, because it's in a group setting, there's this blend of both of them, right? Which is why I call it like it's a fuzzy sort of division, because you can do one and you can do the other.
Right.
They can also meet in the middle. So you can have a personal experience, an individual experience that no one else can experience because it's happening in your own mind.
But that's just being human, right?
But but then also have an outward, a theatrical component.
Sure.
For the benefit of those others at the table or on Zoom, however you're having your game, to have their own experiences. So you can provide them with that material to have their own individual experiences. And so it gets a lot more complicated to sort of talk about it, because role playing isn't just that one thing. Like PH mentioned, it can be, there's a wide variety of categories that fit under role playing, which is why it's important to discuss the other elements of role-playing games, because just because you're role-playing does not mean you're playing a role-playing game.
Right.
Which is why I think it's important to define both, right? So that's
makes
where
total sense.
Yeah, that's where I come from anyway, currently. So let's go to Chad.
Drudenfoots talks about how, I think that's really interesting. And
I think that this gets to what I was just saying. As much as I talk about experience, role play in itself is, for me, about expressing character, not experiencing the situation. I think that is valid. So there is, in the way that I just talked about it.
I would also, just real quick, I won't interrupt.
No, please do.
I would also posit that probably puts Drudenfoots in a minority of role-playing game players. Probably. It sounds like well, I don't want to interrupt, but I just want to.
No, it's not an interruption. I mean, you're totally good. It's a conversation. There's such thing as an interruption, not here anyway.
I think that most. I got to be careful here, because, again, being human, you can't be in everybody else's head. But I think that a lot of what appeals about role-playing games to most people is being involved in stuff that you couldn't experience any other way. So it's interesting to me if somebody engages in role-playing games because they have something specific to say. And I don't know if that's exactly what you mean, Drudenfoots, but if using, it sounds like your engagement with a role-playing game is more about communicating something rather than the sensations involved in doing so. If that makes any sense, and I'm if I'm incorrect, please let me know.
Well, I've seen Drudenfoots also place a very heavy degree of importance, at least what I've interpreted as a heavy degree of importance on bleed. And so I think that it's expressing the character, and I, you know what, I don't want to get into the habit of putting words in people's mouths. So I will say that I have made an observation that character bleed seems to be very important to you, Drudenfoots, and so I completely get where you're coming from with regarding expressing the character, not necessarily experiencing the situation, because you are looking for an emotional sort of connection to the character. And so it's the expression of that character, it's the role playing of that character that allows for that bleed to take place. If I am wrong, please let me know. That's just an interpretation based on what I've read that you've said before. If that's changed, or if I'm wrong, if I'm misinterpreting, please do correct me. But that's what it seems like. And so I think I get what you're saying here. And it's also a very valid way to go about it, because like, while you can have, like, you know, you could do one, you could do the other, you could do both. You can be in a situation where you are role playing for the benefit of others. You can be in a situation where you're role playing to experience it yourself, and you can be in a situation where you're doing both, right? Or you know what? I misspoke. It's not experiencing it yourself. It's for some sort of personal satisfaction, right? So whether it's expressing a character or being in the moment experiencing it, because I don't want to exclude one or the other, because they both sort of occupy that same sort of individual space, but both are valid. And then you can do both. You can be in a moment to experience what is happening with your character, or to express that character, as well as being put in a position to allow those others to then role play based on your input to the imagined space. So I think I get where you're coming from. Drudenfoots also says, I think that's a good point. RPG video games should be taken into consideration regarding any RPG definition.
We'd have to touch on Wildermyth then.
Yeah, well, I haven't played Wildermyth yet, but yeah. I don't know if I am ready to do this, because video games,
they're different beasts.
Yes, they're a different beast, and it requires that I be less specific, which I'm not quite yet prepared to do. I kind of want to get a handle on because there's already so much going on here, right? And I'm not discounting video games. I'm not, by staying here in this space, I'm not saying, oh, well, video games don't count. What I'm saying is just I'm not prepared to discuss those yet. And I think that is a
fundamentally different experience from Civ.
Right, exactly. And so I'm not eliminating them. They're there. I respect them. I'm just not quite ready to talk about them yet, or to bring them into the conversation, because I'm so focused on this piece at the moment. So then PH says, I brought this up because trying to define role-playing outside of the context of games might distort the concept. Role-playing in RPGs isn't necessarily the same as in other activities. I agree with that. But I think that it is good and even necessary to have that definition available, because it's the way that we apply the role-playing game to the role-playing that is important, right? That's my own view.
Keep going with this thread. Cool. He gets to an interesting point.
Okay, I'll keep going. Just because they share the same term, it doesn't mean they operate under the same definition. Well, I agree. That's why I split them. In fact, it may be that role-playing within RPGs requires its own unique concept, separate from other uses of the term in different contexts. Here's the thing with that, though. I very much believe in using common terms as they are commonly used. I think that society and civilization dictate language, right? In the vast majority of cases, it dictates language. And so I want to be able to discuss these topics in a way that someone on the street will readily understand. So I compare it to when role-playing games were first, they're emerging. They're very brand new. There's really no terminology that they have. And just the same as movies stole the terminology from theater and from literature, role-playing games stole the terminology from movies, theater, literature, and war games. And so I think that was very helpful in the initial stages, and even today, right? If someone doesn't know a role-playing game from any other type of activity, you can tell them it's a group storytelling activity, and they'll get it, right? There's a lot more to it than that, but initially using those common terms as they're commonly used becomes very, very important in communicating the idea succinctly and in a very readily understandable way. So that's why I do it the way I do it. I'm not generally engaged in creating terminology. Sometimes I think that it is absolutely necessary and inescapable, but that's why I'm not in that business. I don't denigrate it. I'm not trying to be, I'm not trying to criticize it. I think that sometimes it's necessary. I think that in some circles it makes it easier to discuss because there are people who want to talk about role-playing games in very highly specific ways, and I think that the more you granularize the terminology, the more beneficial it becomes, for sure. However, I think you definitely lose something insofar as your capability to communicate that externally, right? Everyone in the group might know what you're talking about, but those people over there don't, and it becomes much more difficult with a highly specialized group of terms to tell someone what exactly is going on. So that's just my take.
We've talked about this a little bit before too.
Yeah, we have.
Where as something matures, it develops its own jargon.
Yes.
And that's definitely the case. And that is definitely the case in the 50 now, whatever it is, years.
For sure.
55 years or whatever.
And there are common words that role-playing games have adopted to use differently, right? So, it's the nature of.
Also, terms tend to be emergent things in and of their own. Somebody somewhere uses something that everybody at their table or at the con or whatever is like, oh yeah, that's great for this one thing. And then if it is that useful, it will kind of spread by osmosis, the 100th monkeys. And the 100th monkey effect, which is not the 100 monkeys on typewriters, that's the idea of at some point you get to a critical mass where other people who don't have any contact with the original group pick up the thing. Right?
Yes. Zipper.
So the zipper?
Yeah, it's like the word zipper. Like,
oh, right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's there I guess is a certain. I mean, we see that kind of with GNS theory, right? The whole idea and terms behind that, whether or not they're accurate or what have you. But what occurred in the Forge over the early 2000s was very influential for the rest of the hobby. And
and I think
that's just permeated it since then.
And I think that was the goal with the Forge and with GNS theory, was to use common words as they're commonly used.
Exactly.
And I've said, regardless of how useful I think it is, regardless of how I personally, I don't like GNS. I don't like GNS theory as I'm able to understand it. I don't like the big model because it incorporates GNS wholly into the model. However, I think that what Ron Edwards was doing in that moment was a very noble pursuit, right? He was trying to give things names. And I think that's very noble to be able to talk about them in a more specified, critical, or specific, not specified, a more specific, critical sort of a way. So I don't like GNS. I don't use GNS, but I get it. and I absolutely acknowledge the the work that went into it and the benefits of just giving it a try. And that's what I'm doing here, right? I'm just giving it a try. Will it stick? Who knows? I don't know. I'm just some nameless dude on the internet. You know what I mean? But,
you're not some nameless dude. You're bacon. Everything's better with bacon.
Jordan Fuds says, I am fine with being in a minority. It's basically the default, which is, that's to when you were commenting on. Okay, I get that. PH again says, I'm not even taking into account what you mentioned about role-playing being uniquely experienced by different people.
Hey, Heath is here.
Oh, awesome. I haven't gotten that far down yet. Hello, Heath. Let's scroll down for a minute. Hey, Heath, thanks for showing up. Then we're going to come back up here and say, okay. Not even, okay, we already went over that. Judenfoot says, the sensations happen. They are not the drive, though. Expressing the character is to create the atmosphere of the experience. I would love to have a conversation with you about this and really drill down on what your views are. I think that this is a particularly interesting take, and I'd like to sort of get to know it more.
I agree.
Finds it very insightful. So, like I said, I agree with being in a minority. The experience is, for me, emergent. While I feel for many people who are driven, my immersion... While I feel for many people who are driven, my immersion... lose the
by immersion.
Oh, okay, yes. All right.
I feel many people are
Since no depth is expressed, it is just living the character, not engaging in theme or the like. Okay.
That's interesting because so that might be where we get into the difference between the goal of a story game versus I don't want to keep calling it a true role-playing game because I don't believe that. I think it's two sides of the same coin. So let's say a simulation game.
Okay.
That might be where
Curse you.
where that might be why so many story games have that kind of metatextual conversation going on at the table. It's because, is what we're doing now actually fitting the theme that we all want to engage with? So a thematically focused game versus a mechanically focused game is whereas it's weird to me that the more simulationist types call that real role-playing games just because it's closer to what Gygax and all of them were doing when they created the hobby. And somehow, because even though you're engaging in the same activity, just using different rules.
That is such a silly idea to me. And you know what? I don't know. Maybe I'm calling hellfire down on my head right now for saying this, but like, real medicine is not medicine that was practiced 100 years ago.
Right?
Like that. It seems so absolutely ridiculous to me to say that that's because that's how it was at the beginning. It's somehow more true or more accurate. It
doesn't mean it's less so either, though. Just because
I agree.
Just because something is old doesn't.
It's
just
the
because,
path,
and even if it were
of a path, right?
Yeah.
And so it contributed to the
even
path
if
in its entirety. It should be respected. It should be paid its dues, right? I'm not denigrating or criticizing, but
yeah,
I think that statement, the true role playing, I think is, at least with regard to going back to the beginning, is a little silly in my view.
And
I think that it's a preference, but
just because a technology advances does not mean that the older versions become less. Like, we use quote unquote obsolete technologies all the time for all sorts of different things, right?
Sure. My mouse is wired.
It's not. Yeah, right. It's not like Star Trek, where as soon as we get the new advanced thing, it immediately supplants everything that of every version of that technology that came before it. And you see that a ton of times in poorly built science fiction worlds, and heck, even fantasy worlds sometimes, although less so. But science fiction is especially susceptible to it. It's like, hey, this new great technology we just developed, it is now the only technology. Everything that is now been rendered obsolescent by it has been completely replaced. No, humans don't do that.
Yep.
we still use horse-drawn carriages and carts for various things in various parts of the world.
We sure do.
We, sometimes it may be that the only value of that technology is for the hobbyist in that technology at this point, but it still is just as valid and useful as it was when it was created. So, boy, we got into
yeah, man, this has been great. I'm over the moon about how successful this conversation is, at least in my view. But my view's the only.
Yeah, no, we always have good conversations, and this is the chat participation is only making.
Oh, it's awesome. It's off the charts. You guys have been so awesome.
It's fantastic.
Speaking of PH, let's be honest, they didn't fully know what they were doing back then. A lot of rules had no real purpose other than being remnants from board. I completely agree with this. I completely agree with you. They had no idea.
That's where armor class comes from. It comes from a naval combat game.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It was as new to them as it was to everyone else. They were just the ones creating it, but it was still brand new. There was a lot of flailing in the dark. There was a lot of likely mislabeling, misappropriating terminology. However, that's what we've been passed. They've passed it on to us. That's what we got. So I am perfectly happy with that.
A lot of flailing blades in the dark.
A lot of flailing blades. PH again. Maybe we're taking the name role-playing game too seriously now and are trying to retroactively assign a deeper meaning that represents the hobby as we see it today. That's very possible. That is absolutely very possible.
I would totally be on board saying that's exactly what we're doing here tonight.
Yeah.
I'm totally down for it. I have no problem with that.
Mike M says it seems that we use role play in different ways in different contexts. Once the context of game is used, it limits the context a bit. However, it seems the context needs to be further refined. I don't disagree with you. That's kind of sort of why I even endeavored to put the channel together in the first place. It's like, I want to have these conversations. I want to do the refinement. And, if the end result we arrive at is not fit for purpose, okay, at least we went through the exercise and there's value there, right? There's value in discovering that you went in the wrong direction.
Yeah, for sure.
Because then you can readjust. Really, like you said earlier, Sable, you didn't fail. You just found out, 100 different ways to not do it.
Mm-hmm. And this particular comment from Mike here is very interesting in confluence with what Droodenfoots has been saying tonight as well. Is like maybe the term game is not the right thing for what we're doing. Even games tend to have a win-lose condition, like you've said before.
Yeah, and I don't like that. I tend to call it the role play activity. That's personally what I do. However, there's no denying that the population that plays these things at large call them role-playing games, right? So that's kind of what we're saddled with. I prefer role-playing activity, but I'm going to use what I'm given.
Although you could also make the argument, as with emergent terms and things like you said, zipper or Kleenex or whatever.
Yeah.
RPG, by this point, RPG is a concrete, just those letters, RPG, pronounced as a word, is a concrete term that now means its own thing.
No, you're right. You're absolutely right.
So,
Droodenfoot says, so if in another 50 years the hobby's called RPE, role play experience, then you know who started that trend. Yes, and please don't forget us little people.
Exactly.
But here's Heath again. People saying hello to Heath. PH is the thing about common language is that it changes constantly. True. The same word can have different meanings for different groups, even within the same language. Yeah, and that happens in the role-playing game groups as well.
Yeah.
Like,
Keiko was never
asked 5 different people, and that's what I'm doing here. I've asked 5 different people, and I've gotten 5 different replies. So, like, I completely agree with you. But there is worth in trying to find, or value, I should say. There's value in trying to find the common through line. What does everyone agree is a part of the role-playing activity or the role-playing experience, as Droodenfoot said? So I get it. There's a lot fighting against us, right? But it's still, I think, a worthwhile endeavor. And I just only stated my opinion on common language and used commonly. So, like, I know that I know it's imperfect, right? Just as there are imperfections with coming up with highly specialized language. And And so, you can prefer one or the other. I default to the common language used commonly. You can default to highly specialized language. I think there's value, depending on the group you're communicating with, there's value, right? So it just depends on preference, kind of like role-playing games. PH again. We as a community give words their meaning through how we use them. Yes. For instance, our community has already defined what role-playing games means to us. Yes.
Yep. Yeah, like I just said, RPG is its own term by this point.
Yeah, yep.
Thaco was not a word until second edition, and now, if you're an RPG player, you know what So here's an example of jargon too. If you're an RPG player and somebody says Thaco, then for the most RPG players are going to know exactly what you mean. You say that outside of the RPG hobby, and you're going to go, "What?" People are going to look at you funny. So there's jargon.
Yeah. It's inevitable that as language evolves, terms like this will shift in meaning based on how different groups and contexts shape them. Yep. Again, you're completely correct. Heath catching up. Mike commiserating. Jordanfoot's commiserating. Oh, here's Mike with a definition. My definition of role play as it stands at this very moment is an adaptation of behavior or mental activity to imaginary stimulus. That's
really good.
Yeah, it's good. It is succinct. It is
but it
common language used, as
common. What is the difference between that and daydreaming, though?
Well, I think that this is unpackable. So, whereas I have those criteria for art, there's 4 criteria for art, and usually, and it happens every time, I will present them, and I will get pushback immediately. And it's like, well, it's not. This is merely the simplest way to make these statements. There's a lot of unpacking that needs to be done.
The start of the idea.
Yeah, to really kind of have the conversation, you have to unpack it. And I think this is one of those situations where it's very compact and it's very distilled, but it does have to be sort of expanded in the conversation, which is totally fine. I do that all the time.
I like it. I think I agree with it. I just think it has to specify the difference between that and just rule gathering, because there is a difference between actively participating in a role-playing activity or game or experience, whatever you want to call it, versus you can imagine yourself in a situation and respond to it emotionally and make yourself get misty-eyed or start laughing at nothing, and people think you're crazy.
Drudenfuzz says, I'm not sure if determining the common denominator will lead to a useful definition. It will not lead to a useful definition. I will state that unequivocally now. That's not my goal. My goal is not to find what is common and use that as the basis for a definition. My goal is to find the common elements among the definitions so that when a definition is provided, which is going to always be unique and individual, to look for these elements. That's all I'm doing. I want to see
better understand the world around us. Then better understand the world around us. It's like
I'm not looking for. I don't want to make a definition. I'm not going to sit here and interview a bunch of people and get their meanings of a definition, and then mishmash them together as some sort of Frankenstein, and then stand up on a hill and say, "Here, this is the definition because this is what everyone agrees on." Right? It's an impossibility because what we're going to find in common with these definitions, I expect to be very minimal. So it's really going to be it's foundational more than it is definitional, if that makes sense. So it should be a building block on which you can place your definition. But your definition is always going to be different from anyone else's, and it's always going to be personal and individual. That's just the way it is. If movies are based on every film ever made, then The Room is just as valid a contribution as Seven Samurai. Well, there's a difference.
Have you ever seen The Disaster Artist?
Well, this now is this is making quality judgments now, right?
Yeah.
So is The Room is a movie. It's definitely a movie. It has all of the essential elements of being a movie. It's just a terrible movie, right?
But it had a distinct impact.
It did have a distinct impact.
It has cultural influence.
Yes, it absolutely has cultural influence. There are memes. There are Absolutely.
They made a movie about the making of that movie. So.
They did absolutely do that. So I don't think we're going to arrive in this exercise isn't to arrive at any sort of definition. It's just to arrive at the common elements on which most people seem to build their definition. That's all.
Right.
It's a better way of understanding what's going on.
Seven Samurai, though, is an excellent movie, and The Room is a terrible one. And it's a very different experience.
PH Arbeck says, I lean more towards Dr. Lewis Pulsiver's attitude law, which is what? Who cares? Just play it. Mike M says, daydreaming can be role-playing, but one's self-defending on what one daydreams about include. Okay, I'm misreading this. Hold on.
No, yeah. He said depending later on down. So daydreaming.
Okay. So daydreaming can be role-playing by one's self, depending on what one daydreams about, including how it is experienced and expressed. I agree. Daydreaming can absolutely be role-playing. Not a role-playing game, though.
Right.
I did not add game to this definition yet, because I'm trying to determine what the game part of role-playing game adds or limits. Perfectly reasonable.
The whole reason we have streams like this.
Yeah, that's kind of the reason we're doing this.
Yep, 100%.
And then PH Arbex, defining RPG is like defining what is a woman or a man nowadays, not complaining. I think that it is. Look,
statement.
there are definitions are. They do not. All a dictionary does is tell you how words are commonly used. It's not telling you how to use the words, right? Words' meanings change depending on how society changes them through usage, through spelling. I'm actually there's a wide variety of language channels that specifically focus on the English language. The morphology of the English language, how things have changed over time, why things have changed over time. Absolutely, things change. So I'm not looking for a proscriptive or prescriptive. What is it?
Proscriptive.
Okay, I'm not looking for a proscriptive way of telling people how they should talk about definitions. What I'm doing is asking, or what I said that way wrong. My brain's going way too fast. I'm not looking for a proscriptive way of telling people how they should talk about role-playing games. What I'm doing is asking people how they talk about role-playing games and trying to get to a core, I'll call it a core truth. It's not really what it is. It's just the common foundation on which most people understand a role-playing game to be built, right? Or role-playing to be built. So
I'm trying to understand.
Yeah. This is it. Thank you, Dreamfuzz. Thank you.
Appreciate the descriptor. There you go. You're trying to understand the inception of the role-playing game.
Yeah. Are you kidding me, Mike? Have you seen the size of my fingers? I mistype things all the time, and I'm doing it on a teeny tiny phone when I'm not in front of my computer. You don't have to worry about that at all. I need to get better at reading what you mean instead of what was written. Heath is really good at that. I mess, infinite typos in his chat, and he still is able to read what I mean instead of what I've written. So I just need to get better at that. So my apologies. All right. It looks like chat has calmed down. We've been here for 2 hours and 12 minutes, 2 hours and 13 minutes. I am so thankful for you being here. I am so thankful for this conversation. I think that it was wonderfully. Like if I'm rating the conversations that we had on my stream or on my channel, it's going to be Ben, Jax, and myself, and now you and myself at the very top. I think those are just great, and they also happen to be the two most recent ones. So I feel like this makes me feel like I'm kind of moving in a good direction, right?
Good.
So thank you all, chat. I'm just going to end it here if my tone didn't tell you. Did I announce what on Discord? The stream?
The stream?
I did.
Yeah.
Twice, actually. Once when I scheduled it, and then again when we started. Hopefully Heath doesn't get angry at me.
That's part of what the Geek Force is there for, though, I think. We kind of had that discussion a couple months ago now.
Oh, Jordan Fuzz, I appreciate this quite a bit.
Yeah,
I'm very,
no,
very happy to have you here again.
this was you're a huge contributor.
Yeah, this is a huge contributor. I'm so happy that you were here. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, PH. Some systems include types of games and others. Oh, I missed this whole bit up here. The concept of game in RPGs is another rabbit hole. There's not just one game happening, but rather a collection of different games, sometimes working together. Yep, I completely agree with this. Absolutely correct.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone. Mike, BGD,
yeah.
PH, Heath, Druden Fuds, Stochastic Agency, who is now currently engaged in Call of Cthulhu game. I am so thankful for all of you. TPR, I am so thankful for you being here and having this conversation. We always have, in my view, just the best conversations.
We're gonna have to spin off our next stream on that one right there, because that could get into the whole idea of mini games and system design, and whether or not your so-called RPG system is a whole bunch of mini games kludged together, or actually something that's
elegant. I'm willing to have that conversation. Yeah. What is a game, right?
There's all sorts of stuff that we can talk about.
So I have an upcoming stream this Sunday about Mars Express with a new guest, Blaze. So we're going to have the conversation about that film. I absolutely loved it. I'm perfectly happy spoiling my reaction. I think that it's very worth a watch, and we'll get into why on Sunday. So I'll just stop there. But thank you all again. I really appreciate it, and I will see you all soon. Maybe this will become a regular thing, Sable. Maybe we'll just do this weekly. We have a weekly call. Why not just turn it into a stream? But I don't want to. We can talk about that. And I know you're working.
I'd be happy to
trade time. If you want to do halftime my channel, halftime your channel, I'm happy to do that too.
I don't know if I'm going to do streams on my channel, but I'd be happy to do that. At the same time, we tend to get a little spicy in private sometimes.
Oh so. Yeah, I'm not saying that it'll replace the call. I'm just saying that it'll maybe be in addition to.
Yeah, no,
maybe. I don't want to speak for you, and I know I'm just totally putting you on the spot publicly by not asking you privately. So we'll have this.
I'm more than happy to make a regular thing that people can count on attending and consistently have this kind of a contribution, from chat or whatever. That would be awesome. I mean, that's where all of my ideas are coming from. Anyways, like I've been sitting thinking about all this stuff for years on my own, and you tend to start traveling in the same wagon wheel ruts. And so having other inputs that you can bounce off of is like, oh, there's a pothole. Wait a minute. That makes me think about this.
Let's talk about
and
that.
Now I have a new direction to go. So more the merrier.
All right. Absolutely. Awesome. Okay. Again, I thank you all. I thank you, TPR, and I'm going to end here. You get to look at my stupid face for a couple seconds while it ends the stream.
Everybody like the stream. Have a good night.
Yes. Good night, everyone. Thank you so much.